Alrighty, so that's about me. That's about my company. Let me get to the point of the matter of my presentation here today, gang, and that is EdgeX Foundry. So what is EdgeX Foundry? Open source, vendor neutral project and ecosystem. We think that ecosystem is just as an important part of what we're doing as the software that we're creating as part of this open source effort. So I'll speak to that ecosystem here in just a bit. A microservice loosely coupled software framework for providing IoT edge computing. What does that mean? I'll talk more about the details of that here coming up in just a second. The software that we create as part of this project is both hardware as well as operating system agnostic. So we run on Intel, we run on ARM, we run on Linux, Unix, Mac OS, Windows, you name it. We're out there and we're running on it. Typically, you're going to find EdgeX running on things like gateways, things at the edge. So in many cases, it's going to be somewhat limited or resource constrained hardware. We are part of the Linux Foundation. We're a Linux Foundation project. And importantly, the open source software that we create is under the Apache 2 license. If you're not familiar with open source licenses, what does that mean? Apache 2 license says that you can take what we do as work, you can embed it into your own systems, you can create a commercial product out of it, and never even have to come back to the EdgeX Foundry community to let us know. We'd love to have you part of the community, but open source software under Apache 2 license says take it, use it, do whatever you'd like with it. It's yours to do with as you choose. We've been in existence since 2017 as a project that I started when I was at Dell. We now have just recently released our 9th release, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the conclusion of my talk. When you look at EdgeX Foundry and you try to give people a really basic understanding of what it is and what it's there for, what I like to tell people is EdgeX is edge middleware. It connects what are typically considered to be operational technologies with your IT systems. So connecting those PLCs, MCUs, Modbus, BACnet, all the different protocols, those types of things speak, whatever sensor device or quote unquote thing from an IoT perspective you have, it helps to connect that into your IT systems, which means things like your applications, things like your cloud systems, your enterprise systems, all about really providing the connectivity between these two as middleware, allowing edge data to get into your enterprises, as well as allowing your enterprises to communicate back down to your edge devices. Some goals for the project when we first started, all about being an open platform to help provide a unifying edge. We want you to be able to use this and help bring together your edge into your IT systems. We've created an ecosystem as much as a software system. There are over 70 companies now participating as part of EdgeX Foundry, and I'll go into who some of those companies are in just a bit. And we've really tried to create this to accelerate the marketplace, to really help you create edge and IoT systems as quickly as possible. EdgeX Foundry is not going to give you absolutely everything in the world you need to get your things connected into your enterprise, but it sure is a great way to start. And we're very collaborative. As I mentioned, we've got 70-some companies out there that are participating, but we also have thousands of companies now using EdgeX, and they come and tell us what they need, and we try to work very collaboratively with everybody in the world to say, how can we help better provide for edge IoT solutions? As I mentioned, we've been in existence since 2017. I actually started the project back in 2015 when I was at Dell. Dell contributed the code that we initially worked on into the Linux Foundation. At the time, it was the largest open source project from a founding member standpoint that the Linux Foundation have. Today, where we started with 50 companies, we're over 75. And as I mentioned, we just had our 9th release, what we called our Jakarta release. I'll speak to the releases here in just a bit, but you can see that we've steadily released twice a year ever since our founding in 2017. So we've got a pretty good track record. We think we've got a great platform. We'd love to see you use it and adopt it, or even better, come join us as a community member. So what exactly does EdgeX do in terms of how it works? How does it help connect your things into your enterprise? I'll get into the words behind this slide in just a second. What I find is trying to cover how it works with a slide in words like this isn't always beneficial. I find most people react much more quickly in explaining EdgeX and how it works when I go right from a diagram, from a visual. So what you see here on the screen right now is the EdgeX architecture. Each one of the boxes you see on the screen, for example, scheduler or GPIO device service, each one of these is a microservice. So this whole collection of services is EdgeX Foundry. It's very flexible. You can choose to use all of it, or you can choose to use pieces of it. You can even replace pieces of it. You can replace any one of the services you see here on the screen. That's the great and wonderful thing about the platform, is it allows to be used in combinations that we never even perceived, but in ways that people can really flex into their environments. What its job again is to provide connectivity to things or sensors or devices. So we've got those shown here at the what we call the south side, or at the bottom of the screen. It's to connect your things into your enterprise, be that your cloud systems, your enterprise applications, your databases, whatever typically is in your back-end IT environment. So it's to connect those two things together. How it works is, let's say you have some sort of sensor, like maybe a thermostat, and it's detecting temperatures in a room. We have a collection of services we call device services that are all about speaking a particular protocol and ingesting sensor data from those particular systems. So in this case, detecting temperature off a thermostat in BACnet protocol, for example, would then get the data into the next layer of services we have, which are our core services. In particular, getting the data into what we call our core data service, where the data is persisted, at least temporarily. You need data persistence for a couple of reasons. You may need to take a historical back look. In other words, if you see that the temperature is 102 degrees right now, what was it an hour ago? So you can make some decisions based on that. And you also need the data persisted for a little bit, because you may need to store that data before it's sent off, because you're not always connected when you're at the edge. Think about an edge system that might be running on a boxcar or a shipping container. These systems go in and out of connectivity, so you need to store the data so you can forward it at a later time. Once EdgeX has stored the data through its core services, it then makes the data available to what we call the application services. Application services jobs are to get the data off the box, or what we call export it into things like your cloud and your enterprise. And it does so in any way, shape, or form you need. You can compress it. You can filter the data. You can secure it by encrypting it, for example. We can put it in whatever format you like. We can send it to any cloud you like. Application services are all about getting the edge data when, where, and how you need it, whenever you need it. They also serve another purpose, and that is application services also take the data, reformat it, and direct it back into services that might perform any kind of analytics at the edge. In particular, we ship it as a default, we ship with a product called eKuiper. It's a edge-based rules engine. And that rules engine can look at the data and make decisions about maybe what has to happen at the edge, so that not all decisions have to happen in the cloud. Some things, for latency reasons or because of criticality, you may want to have done at the edge. Our rules engine, in the way of eKuiper, can take a look at the data coming in from sensors and make decisions. And it would call on things like our command service and then back down to another device service to potentially do something like stop the machine. So what you see here is EdgeX not only provides for the flow of data from things, what we call south side things, up to your north side enterprise cloud applications, but it also uses and adjusts that data so that it can be used internally to make low latent, very quick decisions at the edge, even across protocols. In this case, from BACnet to MQTT, at the edge, so that things can be done even independent from what's happening in the enterprise. That's what EdgeX is all about. All these other boxes you see on the screen are there to help support that mission. We've got security services to help secure what's going on at the edge. We've got management services to do things like be able to determine memory usage, CPU usage, things of that nature. All the other services out there helping to support that major mission at the edge, which is middleware to get things connected to your enterprise and also being able to make decisions at the edge. So boiling it down, what we really have here in EdgeX is what I call dual transformation engine. A means to translate incoming data from sensors and things into an EdgeX format, and then delivering that data with another transformation back into your IT environments, your TCP/IP-based solutions typically of your enterprise. That's what EdgeX is all about. A couple of things that I'll cover then with regard to EdgeX, just so you have some background about the platform. We again are platform agnostic. I mentioned how we run on any hardware or any OS. We try to be very, very flexible. You can see that microservice architecture allows you to replace any element. And we actually encourage that. We encourage best of breed solutions. For example, we ship with a great rules engine, eKuiper, but you may have your own analytics. Maybe you have your own machine learning you want to place at the edge. We encourage that. Take our rules engine out or augment it with your own capability. That's entirely on you about how to best serve your use cases. Any one of our components out there allows you to replace it with what you consider better technology. Again, we have to offer store and forward, as I mentioned, for those two critical reasons, historical backlook as well as being able to store and forward. Not all edge systems do that. Some edge systems require you to be connected 100% of the time. EdgeX does not. And we facilitate intelligence moving closer to the edge. Because of latency concerns, because of bandwidth concerns, because of operating costs, you may need to have as much done at the edge as possible. EdgeX facilitates that. We connect what we consider brown and greenfield devices and sensors, meaning maybe legacy things like Modbus, which have been around since 1979, as well as new things, your wireless protocols, things like Bluetooth, Zigbee, Z-Wave. EdgeX is there to help facilitate any of these types of devices or sensors and get them connected into your back-end environments. And we do so in a very secure and easily managed means. We actually allow for EdgeX, even though I showed you in our diagram everything kind of operating in one fell swoop, in one system, if you will, we actually, because of our loosely coupled microservice architecture, allow you to split those services across whatever compute you have available. So for example, if you've got some sort of edge gateway, you could run some of the services on that gateway, while then you could maybe move some of the other more resource-intensive services back into a server or even onto the cloud. We distribute EdgeX across whatever compute, storage, and network you have available. Again, making it very, very flexible. In fact, we even have circumstances where some of the lower level services, things we call device services that actually connect by protocol, actually run on the sensors themselves. The technology we use in the background, we started off as a Java project. We found that to be a little bit too big for most edge systems, so we've transitioned. Most of what we do today is either in Go or in C. Most of the things, especially with regard to connectivity, are done in C or C++ because that's what we find typically in embedded types of things. We do use a little bit of JavaScript for things like the user interface we provide by default. But essentially, we're polyglot believers, meaning you use what language and what tools make sense for you for each part of the system. There are REST communications between each of those boxes I showed on the screen. We allow for you to essentially replace that REST API with your own capability. That's what gives us that flexibility. We use Redis for persistence at the edge, but we've actually shown and proven through many implementations you can replace that database if you so choose. We provide an abstraction. So Redis is used by default, but we'll use what you like. We also do use messaging, especially on the critical data flow of data going north. You don't have to use REST. The data can be published, subscribed through things like an MQTT broker, if you've got a broker available to you, or even through things like Redis PubSub. And of course, as an open source project, we use lots of other open source technology. So things like our security are done by other open source components like Kong and Vault. And again, as I already mentioned, we're using things like eKuiper as our rules engine. Let me quickly just kind of cover a couple of elements with regard to where we're at in terms of our cadence. Again, as I mentioned, we release twice a year. We just released our Kamakura release, and that came on the back of what we called our Ireland release. Ireland was EdgeX 2.0. So for those groups saying, hey, is this a mature technology? Yes, we already have passed the threshold of many, many releases, and we actually now are at EdgeX 2, which came out this summer. This was a major release for us, our second major release. Provided for a lot of new capability, as well as taking care of a lot of technical debt that had been building up over the course of about 4 years. And then highlights to this included we added new message bus capability, especially around the export of data. So we're much more message inclined today, and that's going to improve things going forward. And we had a lot of security elements. So for folks who may have looked at EdgeX way back when, I encourage you to take another look, as there's been a lot of improvements to EdgeX over the course of the last 4 years, culminating in the Ireland release this summer. And as I mentioned, we just came out, in fact, just a couple weeks ago, November 17th, with our Jakarta release. This was our 9th release. This was a minor release, and it was a release that really was more about stabilization. We wanted to make sure that after we came out of the 2.0 cycle, that we really had a product that was rock solid. And in fact, having done so, this was our very first LTS release, or long-term support release. What does that mean? That means that now today, if you use EdgeX, you have the guarantee of the community that for 2 years, this release will keep it up to date with regard to things like major bug fixes. And if there is some sort of critical issue or error, we will actually jump in there and help to support it. I don't know if too many open source projects are actually doing that. So this is a pretty big endeavor on the part of the project and a great win for those who are adopting EdgeX Foundry. By the way, too, we also announced a new program to help attract folks like you who might be interested in joining our community, and that is we announced the Developer Badge Program. If you fix 2 bugs or you make your very first contribution, we now issue a badge, a certificate, if you will, that you can add to things like your LinkedIn or your Twitter account, let people knowing that you actually contribute to and are participating in this wonderful open source effort. I'm going to skip a couple slides because I know we are tight on time. A couple things that might be of interest to folks, especially from an embedded world standpoint. Our platform is fairly tiny. We actually run in about, from a minimal perspective, as little as 42 megabyte. On a platform that's a gateway out there will take up about 26% of the CPU. So again, an application really designed to function at the edge. And we actually operate with regard to what we call the full loop of getting data from the sensor, being able to understand that data and actuating back down on that data to something else like shutting off the machine. We can do that in about 300 milliseconds. So that's something that's a pretty tight time frame. It's not real time, but it's near real time and usually satisfies a great deal of the use cases that are out there. Our goal when we wrote the EdgeX was to be able to fit on a Raspberry Pi 3 type of device. We're not endorsing that as a major device for things like embedded or edge systems out there. We do think it's a nice device, but it's one that a lot of people target from a development standpoint. And yes, indeed, EdgeX can actually run on a Raspberry Pi 3. We've got lots of people, as I mentioned. The ecosystem is just part of what's great about this project. We've got about 210 overall contributors to EdgeX today. About 30 or 40 of them are active at any one time, and we've had over 8.2 million container downloads of EdgeX. That's a statistic that's a little misleading in that you need many services for any one deployment because we are a microservice based architecture. We think that there's probably just under 1 million deployments out there in the world today. So if you join us, you are not alone. Not alone either from contributor standpoint, not alone also from adopter standpoint. And as I mentioned, we've got some pretty big adoption out there. This is a list of some of the companies that have publicly said we're using EdgeX as part of our products. And as I mentioned, we're part of a 70+ member company or organization right now, if you will. The icons you see on the screen are some of the leading companies that are in effort with us to produce EdgeX and get it out there and get it used in the field in that setting of almost a million deployments, as I mentioned. So you would be in good stead if you take a look at EdgeX and look to adopt it as part of your Edge solution. Some links on the screen here. Would love to come back and provide a demo to you. In fact, if anybody would like, please contact me. I'd be happy to provide a demo and get into more of the technical details of EdgeX. But there's some great links here on the screen to help you dig into a little bit better. GitHub is obviously where our source code is, but things like our technical documents are pretty easy to find, docs.edgexfoundry.org. As well as you'll find a lot of information out there. In fact, the actual demos online, adopters who are actually using EdgeX, you can find online out there. You can take a look at some of the videos out on YouTube. And with that, with just a few minutes left, I want to leave you and say thank you and allow you hopefully to get to your weekend and hope you enjoy a great weekend. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Reach out to me at jim@iotechsystem.com.